Welcome to the Making Kids Count podcast, brought to you by Kentucky Youth Advocates, where we sit down with policymakers, community leaders, and youth to discuss ideas to make Kentucky the best place to be young. Welcome to the Making Kids Count podcast. I'm Shannon Moody with Kentucky Youth Advocates, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today as we preview the 2026 Kentucky General Assembly. As we move into this legislative session, we have our legislators coming together to vote on bills and negotiate the state's next two-year budget within this 60-day session that starts on January 6th. So while the legislature is headed back to Frankfort soon, there are some opportunities still and time to reach out to your legislators, your House and Senate members, if you're interested in making that connection, continuing to build that rapport, and having a conversation with them about what your priorities are for the 2026 legislative session. But today I'm joined by three folks with unique Frankfort lenses on kids issues and then broadly on the policy landscape here in Frankfort and Kentucky. We are going to hear today from Shane Noem, a Republican lobbyist from Northern Kentucky, and with Roebling Solutions and a Kentucky Youth Advocates esteemed board member. We're really glad to have him. Also, we have Jared Smith, a partner at the government and public relations firm Piper Smith, based in Lexington, Kentucky, and also a supporter of KYA in their lobbying efforts in Frankfort. And then also my colleague, Alicia Watley, Kentucky Youth Advocate Senior Policy and Advocacy Director. So thanks to you all for joining us today. We're really glad to have you. First, we're going to start with a quick just download on what KYA's policy priorities and the Blueprint for Kentucky's Children policy priorities are before we dig into what to expect, what we think we may see our legislators focused on and talking about. But Alicia, can you just do a quick walkthrough of the policy and budget priorities that we will see from the Blueprint for Kentucky's Children as KYA has worked with partners across the state to develop that consensus agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shannon. Always a pleasure to be back on the podcast. And I can give a quick overview of kind of what we have on the Blueprint agenda this year. So, as you mentioned, it's a list of priorities that we'd like to see considered by our General Assembly in 2026. And so it does include a number of specific budget items and also policy priorities that we're going to be working on, along with our partners across the state who helped us develop this agenda. So I'm not going to go through every single item that's on there right now, just in the interest of time, but I did want to just kind of talk about some of the main themes that you will see if you take a look at the Blueprint agenda. So we look a lot at how we can address child safety and well-being in any environment that we know kids are in. So this is anything from ensuring that they are safe from abuse in school and childcare settings, but also things like having access to safe and affordable housing and utilities for their families. We also are looking at things like common sense juvenile justice solutions that we can be thinking about for our kiddos. And then we also want to look at priorities that give kids more of what we do think they need and less of what they don't. So things like how can we curb nicotine use among our kids, and how can we enhance opportunities for positive childhood experiences and opportunities to thrive when kids are at school and out of school time as well. So that's a really brief overview of some of the things that you will see on the Blueprint this year. It has been released, so please go check it out. If you haven't taken a look, you can see kind of the in-depth Blueprint, of course, on our website at kyyouth.org/Blueprint Kentucky. And then you can also see not only the full list of priorities, but also fact sheets on all of those items. So if you heard something that sounded interesting and you want to learn more, we do have a fact sheet on every item that we're going to be working on this year.
Our partners and kid advocates usually have a robust agenda moving into every legislative session. We try really hard to identify those common ground, common sense opportunities. And we also know that sometimes it takes a couple of sessions to get things moving and through, but we're hopeful about 2026 and the budget session. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from both Shane and Jared about their thoughts around what to expect with the budget and then just session overall. So Shane and Jared, would you talk a little bit about what you anticipate this budget cycle looking like and some of the biggest considerations that are on the table in 2026 as the as the House and Senate craft their biennial budget.
Yeah, I'm happy to go ahead, Shane, unless you want to jump in.
No, go for it.
I kind of want to tell people, abandon all hope, ye who enter into this budget session. This is a much different budget session than before. I promise I'm not writing that on my budget ask they're already in. But this is going to be the first time that probably almost half, if not just more than half of the legislature will craft a budget without era dollars. And to me, I think that's crafting a budget to begin with is very challenging. This one, I think, ranks up the level of difficulty a couple notches. So I expect it to be a very, very tough budget session just because of that. Plus, this ties into KYA stuff, but they're going to have to answer a lot of questions about Medicaid. And so I think Medicaid is going to be a big, big issue that they're going to have to deal with, and that directly affects children. The House has talked a lot about workforce housing, which hopefully can put a lot more children in better homes. But still, those aren't going to happen overnight. It's going to take a year or two to get the workforce housing built. And so that is one spot I'm actually hopeful in the budget is for workforce housing and some stuff like that. Shane, educate everybody with what I forgot.
No, you did a good job covering it there. The things I'd add to that is, things have gone up in households and families across the country. Government's not immune to that. And costs to operate a state have gone up. And so we've seen the headlines about a $305 million budget shortfall. This aligned with a well-needed income tax decrease will be dropping down to 3.5% first of the year. We're being told don't expect another cut for the foreseeable future until things level off a little bit. So I think there's some good and bad in there, right? The individual residents are going to get a relief while costs are going up, but we've got to fix the shortfall. We are going to see a lot less come out this session. We're in the past couple years, everybody's gotten something. I think there will be winners and losers in the budget game this year of what nonprofits get funded, what capital projects get funded. They might have to wait 2 years. They might have to wait another 4 years before we have a little more certainty. But the good news is Kentucky has been very fiscally responsible going back to 2016, and we now have the largest budget surplus or rainy day fund. Think of this as your savings account in the country per capita. So we're sitting at, I think the last number I heard was $5 billion. So the good news is Kentucky is structurally sound in a way that we've not been in a long time. So while this year is going to be a tight one and all families are tightening the belt a little bit, Kentucky's going to do the same, but it's not going to hurt as bad because the state's been very smart in how they've been planning.
So when we're thinking about Shane and Jared, some of those potential new investments, we may see some less robust inclusions when it comes to new investments or delayed or like you said, Shane, maybe they wait a couple of cycles to include anything new. But there was discussion around housing, there was discussion around and have been discussion around nutrition. And other needed investments to close some gaps that we may see as a result of the House resolution or the resolution in the budget from the federal government. Any hope for new investments that could lead to good outcomes for kids and families that are on your brain?
I wouldn't say no hope for anything, but I would say very targeted, specific deliverables. So anybody that's coming to Frankfurt, you got to make sure your ducks are in a row. I would also say that there's no sacred cows in a budget. Just because something has been funded, we've seen this. You can say Doge was good or bad, but what it did was it allowed us to assess everything that government's doing and say, is this needed? And that trickles down to the state, and that mindset trickles down to the state. And so while something may have been funded for 20 years, maybe it's time to restructure how that project is going and what that funding is for. As far as the Medicaid numbers, we're going to have final numbers, I believe it's mid-March. So we'll have a full picture of what that obligation is going to be like. The feds are going to do what the feds are going to do. I don't think anybody in this state is going to have an impact on what the federal government does. But we do control how we react to that and how we plan for the future. And I think, again, this legislature has been really strategic in how they're planning for that. But I would go back to there's no sacred cows. Don't take anything for granted, and you really got to produce what the ROI is for whatever budget ask we've got.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quick that I think, that, yeah, there are no sacred cows. I think, but they're going to fund education, and that's going to be a very large chunk of the budget. And there's going to also be other things too. If you have a one-time price tag, not a recurring cost, the legislature is probably more likely to listen to you than if you have something with recurring costs in this budget cycle. I do know, I will applaud Chairman Petrie and Chairman McDaniel for doing big one-time projects last year and singling those out as one-time, not recurring. So I think the issue is most of KYA's issues are recurring because we're always going to have poverty, we're always going to have kids, so. But we got to find what is the best way to make the case and use that dollar to go to the legislature and say this will give you a return on your investment X fold.
And if I may add to that, if you're independent of being a resident of Kentucky, looking strategically at our state and the future and the challenges that we face, education and health are the two things time and time again that we come back to. And we can't really fix adult behavior in any systematic way. But what we can do is set the next generation on a path to success so that they are not going to be a burden on the system. They're not going to get in trouble. They're not going to have poor health outcomes. And that is going to change Kentucky's future in a big way. And what I see time and time again is this legislature, this administration in the governor's office, they're focusing on education and health, education and health. And that's the best thing that we can do as a state to help point us in the direction where we'll succeed in the future.
So you all touched on two topics that I know that we heard a lot about during the interim with committees and task force meeting throughout the summer. There are a couple of key areas of interest, housing, nutrition, health, education, juvenile justice, childcare. What are some of the top takeaways from observing the General Assembly over the interim that you all saw? And Alicia, I'll kick it to you first, and we'll go around.
Yeah, I think that really some of the things that I observed watching committees and task forces over the last several months are echoing what you just heard from Jared and Shane. I think our lawmakers were paying really close attention throughout the interim to what was happening with federal changes. And I saw an interest in trying to figure out what that could look like in Kentucky and what that will look like in Kentucky. I do think our legislators were paying close attention to how we can kind of Kentuckyize the solutions that we're seeing at the federal level. Every state is having the same discussions, trying to figure out what to do with some of the changes from HR 1, that large budget bill from the summer. But I heard our legislators talking about finding ways to continue to provide services that we know are essential to kids and families, despite some of the changes that we've never seen here in the state. But also, implementing some of the core tenets of federal movements, such as the Make America Healthy Again movement that people have heard a lot about. There was a task force here in Kentucky over the interim. And they took some of the core tenets of that movement, but they really zeroed in on child health in a way that I think fits Kentucky kids' needs. So they weren't looking at that movement like, let's address everything all at once. Let's really tailor some solutions to our state and our kids, and find ways that we can target things like nutrition and childhood obesity and some of the issues that they felt like were most pressing here in Kentucky. And I also think that I saw them taking time to really understand those changes. They brought in a lot of people from different fields and sectors and experts to talk about what changes might look like and really tried to understand how that's going to impact people on the ground in our state. And being, I think, really intentional in considering ways to implement those thoughtfully in 2026.
Yeah, I would say that there are two task force that I watched closely, and one was the housing, and the other was the MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again task force. With MAHA, I think a lot of people cynical of it might have said, "Oh, this is going to be some controversial, flame-throwing task force, and nothing serious is going to come out of it." But if you watched it unfold and looked at the leaders that were really leading these conversations, and you were expecting the cynical take, you would have been shocked. They were bringing in professionals, experts. I mean, I think you're going to see a meaningful public school nutrition bill come out of this. and really talking about what food are our kids getting when they're at school. And sure, it might go out to the lowest bidder, but can we do some more to increase the nutritional quality and values of this? Can we get the soft drinks out of the vending machines and replace it with healthier options? I think some meaningful things will come out of that, in addition to looking how it lines up with federal SNAP regulations and what foods individuals that are on public assistance are able to get. But in housing in particular, and especially how this pertains to kids, we know that kids in poverty need stability more than anything. And one of the biggest things that we can do is make sure that we have a stable housing environment so that families aren't having to up and move in the middle of the school year. They're not having to couch surf, just to have a roof over their head. And, this is a national problem. This isn't just a Kentucky problem, but we have been leading in this. Northern Kentucky, in particular, has been a leader in the housing conversation. Now, Kentucky as a whole is still leading the nation in addressing this. But I think you'll see some meaningful changes that keep local control, which is important to our local elected officials, but also allow for some changes to make more housing go up more affordably and in more places.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, there was a big AI task force and they danced around it a little bit, but something that wouldn't cost the state a dime, I don't think, would be great for kids' mental health is to restrict social media accounts till they're 16, 18, whatever that number is. I do not believe, and I have had conversations with leadership, the excuse that these companies can't tell how old a user is. No matter what they sign up for as their age, these companies know within 3 to 5 days exactly how old that user is. So I think that's something that doesn't have a price tag. It could really impact Kentucky kids' health, mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And we may see dollars coming into the state down the road from social media companies that the Attorney General and, several Attorney Generals across the nation are pursuing when it comes to the impacts of social media on kids' mental health. So it's certainly the interim is such a great opportunity to really understand what's on the minds of our legislators, the questions that they have, the experts that they bring to the table, and that my observation too is that they really want to spend some time learning and getting to understand an issue and start to shape their priorities, during the interim leading up to that next legislative session. So a lot of robust conversation, and I think folks learned a lot, and there's a lot of opportunity for across the aisle conversations and collaboration that is just good for the Commonwealth overall. So, we talked a little bit about what we saw in the interim and some of the things that maybe we're hopeful for, that we could see impacting kids and families during the 2026 session. I'm wondering what you all see as the biggest challenge facing kid advocates walking into Frankfurt in 2026. Like, what do you think our kid advocates are going to be facing, some of the toughest challenges when they head to Frankfurt in January?
I think the biggest challenge is setting expectations. A lot of the solutions that are being presented are financially related, and we have fiscal realities that we're going to be addressing this year in particular. And every budget session, there's always fiscal realities that come with asks. But this year in particular, I think set the expectation that it's a little tighter. Play the long game out with this. Maybe you're laying the groundwork for 2 years out. But it's a math game. It's not personal. I'm a Republican. I'm a Republican activist, and what I tell my friends on the other side of the aisle is this isn't personal. Lawmakers just have a different philosophy. If you're a Democrat, you're not wrong. Your feelings about these policies are not wrong. But Republicans often come at it from a fiscal angle first, and then how do we make sure our fiscal house is in order so we can do these strategic investments that are being advocated for? And that goes national down to local is, the federal government hasn't balanced a budget in forever. Kentucky, because of pension obligations and other restraints, we've been working on kind of getting our fiscal house in order. So if legislators say no to your fiscal ask, it's not personal. They're just doing a math equation.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say there's probably so many ask in and so many more hands out than before with less to give out from the state. So it will be interesting. And I would just, it's going to be tough for everybody, not just people that advocate for children. But I think as long as we have a great message, and when you show how the state's investment can be returned x-fold, I think that there's always a good chance for kids to be taken care of, at least on a couple of these things.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page on our ideas here on this. For me, the biggest challenge, which again is not unique to 2026, but it's going to be finding ways to keep the kid issues that we're talking about at the top of legislators' minds. There's going to be so many priorities, so many asks out there, so many advocates kind of trying to get their top priority heard in committee or get their bill moving, and only so much time, even though it's a long session. I think we're expecting a lot of bills, just like we saw last year and how it's been growing every year. So there's just going to be a lot to consider for our legislators on top of the budget. And so how do we kind of, fight that competition for the airtime in Frankfurt? But to your point about finding some hope in what we can be looking for there, Shannon, I think for me it's we do have the right cause being Kentucky kids, and I think it's an opportunity for kid advocates to really come together with a unified voice, asking legislators to just keep kids and families in mind as they're considering every bill and every budget item that's coming across their desk, and how is it going to impact kids and families. And that's one way that we can, I think, come together and be unified about our messaging in Frankfurt.
Yeah, it can definitely be hard to balance those short-term needs that and solutions that need to be addressed, but then also thinking long-term, the future of our Commonwealth is dependent on the overall well-being of our kids today. So how do we ensure that they're able to think about the short term and the long term and balance all of that in a very short, but technically our long 60-day session? It goes so fast. So Shane and Jared, I'm wondering, based on what we heard as far as the challenges and keeping kids at the forefront and just the realities of there's a lot of needs and not necessarily a lot of wiggle room. What's your biggest piece of advice for listeners as they advocate for kids in 2026?
I'll go. If you're sending, do not send form emails or do not leave a form message on the LRC line. Make sure each email is individual to the legislator. Make sure each message you leave on the LRC hotline is really your message, and you're not just reading off of a script. No offense to great groups that do that, but this the first thing the legislators tell you is that once they start seeing a bunch of stuff that's the same, they kind of just blur it out. So that's the best advice I can give to any citizen advocates out there.
My advice to advocates and anybody watching the General Assembly is first turn off your cable news. Ignore the national news because what's happening here in Kentucky is very unique to Kentucky. And let's not try to nationalize anything. We've got a governor who is flirting with the idea of running for president. What he's doing on that is independent of this. Any of these national themes that are coming down, they're filtering through and they're going to be Kentuckyized. So let's check the national politics at the door and let's focus on what's best for Kentucky and Kentucky kids.
Can you say that again, Shane? I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
Louder for those in the back.
Kentucky has a lot of unique and beautiful things to offer in the Commonwealth, and I think the focus on the Commonwealth is where we need to be headed as we're moving into the 2026 legislative session. Again, thank you, Shane and Jared and Alicia, so much for joining us today. Really glad to hear your all's perspectives on what you're looking forward to for 2026. It sounds like it's going to be a tight budget. There are obviously hard conversations and hard decisions that our legislators are going to have to make as they move into the legislative session, but also there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of ways in which we can improve the lives of kids across the Commonwealth if we're pragmatic, we set realistic expectations, and we keep some hope and optimism in our back pocket as we're moving into Frankfurt. So again, appreciate you all joining us today. If you are interested, as Alicia had mentioned, in learning more about those blueprint priorities, getting tools for advocacy and tips and other information to help those conversations and outreach to your legislators, visit kyyouth.org to learn more. And then would just encourage folks to take the next couple of days of rest, and we'll see you all as the legislative session begins in January. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Making Kids Count podcast. For more information and to listen to more episodes, visit kyouth.org/podcast. To support this podcast and our mission as the independent voice for Kentucky kids, please consider making a gift at kyouth.org/donate.